Hey,
Oh, the recording just started, so I'll say it again.
yes.
Hey, Annie.
Hey, David.
I was saying as we were getting ready here, this is an extreme honor on my side of things, and I'm so happy to be hanging out with you. How's it going so far, introducing this into the world? What does it feel like to be enjoying Pub Day?
I don't know if enjoy is the word that I would use. Um, so first of all, I'd like to say that, the fandom is mutual. So I'm pretty
That's
excited to be
it's
chatting with you.
impossible for me to believe, but thank
No,
you,
it's
thank
true.
you so much.
Actually, so we didn't talk about, so we talked a little bit about my dad in the pre-chat, but uh he came to my house one Thanksgiving clutching your book, You're Not So Smart.
You're not so smart.
And
Oh, wow.
all he did was talk about it. And then he left it on the kitchen counter and demanded that I read it,
That's
which he
amazing.
does. He demands things like that.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, he was like clutching it. He's like, this book is so good.
Oh, well,
Um,
I will deliver this to my father and see what happens because
well,
this
there you go. So I have your book in my house, but it was originally my father's copy.
Oh, that's so rad. It's so weird and
Isn't
so
that
surreal.
great?
So yeah, this is surreal and wonderful for me, and I'm so happy that we could be here. I'm glad everybody could join us to do this. I've got a million questions in my head. We only have 30 minutes. I'll never get to all of them, but one thing I want to say is, as I read your book, I expected one thing and sort of got another. I didn't realize there was sort
Oh,
of this stealth thing getting in there about decision making and judgments, and then you have Kahneman right there on your cover now, who's saying, "Hey, go buy this book. It's great." What does that feel like to have Daniel Kahneman say, "No, really, you should check it out"?
well, I'll tell you what felt really good was when Daniel Kahneman said he learned a lot from it.
Oh, wow, that's so
That
cool.
was probably the best thing outside of, my children and my husband ever that ever happened to me. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm very lucky because this book, really took a village. And lucky for me, that village included Daniel Kahneman, Richard Thaler, both Nobel laureates, um, whose work is very foundational to sort of our bias against quitting. And so I was lucky enough to have access to them. Uh, Danny, we talked a few times. Richard, in particular, I mean, he read many versions of the book, gave me really deep and insightful comments on it, lots and lots of Zooms, sort of pinging me, pointing me in the right direction. Barry Staw, who's an incredible figure in the field as well, really generous with his time. And there was just a whole bunch of other people too, many of whom have blurbed on the back of the book, but Phil Tetlock, Don Moore,
Oh,
all
wow.
these people who just like in their own right have written amazing books that everybody should go read. And I just pinched myself like trying to figure out how I had access to these people. One of the images that comes to my mind is when I was growing up, we had our, television that had, where I lived, three channels,
Mhm.
and this like braided rug. And I imagine this person, that version of me sitting on that rug, who's like seven, in this town in New Hampshire with my school teacher dad, and seeing people on TV, and sort of saying, what would that person think that, I got to spend all this time with like Danny Kahneman and Richard
Mhm.
Thaler, and I just pinched myself. I can't even
I love
believe that
that.
they got to help with the book.
No, you're super fortunate, and it's neat to be like I'm a co-nerd in this world of decision making, judgments, rationality, psychology stuff, and yeah, it thrills me that I feel like now there's a there's some degrees of separation converging, and that feels really cool. So I am very happy for you, and they're right. It is a
Thank
really
you.
cool book. Um,
But it's a really cool book, mostly because of them. I mean,
oh,
that's the
that's
thing, is
nice.
like all of these people who were so generous with their time. The fact is that it's their work, decades
Hmm.
and decades and decades of work on errors in human judgment, that is foundational to the book. So without them, this book doesn't exist. And certainly, like, without their comments, it doesn't exist in the form that it's in, which is much better for having had all of these people helping me. And that's separate and apart from the people who made incredible introductions for me to people like Stuart Butterfield, who makes an appearance in the book. So I feel like I definitely didn't write this book alone. And it is what it is because of the people that were willing to give me their time. So that
Hmm.
was just really lucky.
Which is it's great. It was a great title. I also love the hang up your gloves is right there. We'll talk about some of that in just a second. I also enjoyed on Twitter today seeing people's reactions. Some people had just it was their first time to hear about it, and there are all these things about you should tell this famous person, you should tell this famous person when it's
Someone said
time to
you need to
quit.
give this book to Putin.
I saw that. And
I thought I
and
was like, mm.
yeah, and also I love the one that was like, "Wow, self-help books have really changed these days." So
Yeah, you're telling people to quit now.
it's but that's the secret sauce of this and the stealth message. I love that throughout the book, you keep telling people to be a better decision maker. You need to skill up on quitting. I like that phrasing. And this
Thank
is an
you.
actual quote from the book, and this is where I'll start asking some questions. Is that um, you said, imagine if we had to stick to everything forever. If every decision we made was a forever decision. And you have a quote. This is the quote. If I had to skill somebody up to get them to be a better decision maker, quitting is the primary skill I would choose because the option to quit is what allows you to react to a changing landscape. Okay, that's a fantastic sort of theme and thesis statement. What was your inspiration for this? I want to like assume it had to be poker related, but it could be something else. And since I don't know yet, inform me. How did this become an idea that insisted upon it being a book?
Oh gosh. So, I think it's always so hard to reconstruct these things.
Hmm.
So first of all, I am someone who is both very gritty and very quitty. So I stick to very hard things, but I
Hmm.
also quit things a lot. So I quit graduate school after 5 years and left to become a poker player. I quit poker to pursue what was already a flourishing career in speaking and consulting. But I needed to free up a whole bunch of time to write some books that I really felt like writing. This is the third one of those.
Hmm.
Um, so, and then separate from that, just separate from sort of the arc of my life, which is a lot of what feels like a lot of left turns, although thematically they're the same, is that in poker, you better be able to fold a lot. And if you're thinking about sort of what's the difference between an amateur and an elite poker player, it's the ability to fold more.
Hmm.
So, you know, essentially, like elite poker players play only about 75% of the two card combinations that they're dealt, whereas amateurs play over 50% of them. And that's just like to start the hand. That doesn't have to do with like they're better at folding in the middle of hands. They're better at figuring out when they should get up from games because they really recognize something that's incredibly important is that if you continue to play a hand that isn't worthwhile anymore, that's money that you can't use on a hand that is. And that is a way to go broke. So
Hmm.
this becomes something that poker players talk and think about like really deeply, trying to get better at this particular skill of quitting. That being said, like in terms of this particular book, I think the inspiration actually came from my last book. Somebody once said something to me. I don't know. You can tell me if you've heard this before, that for them in their writing, the next book was always like one page or half a page in the previous book.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I didn't really understand what they meant until this happened. So I wrote my last book, How to Decide, and there's about 3 paragraphs maybe on quitting that have to do with this idea that if you're starting things when you're uncertain, like if I start something, I don't have all the facts and there's a whole bunch of luck that's going to be involved. And so I have to do that when I'm incredibly uncertain. And after I start, I'm going to learn a whole bunch of new stuff.
Hmm.
So quitting, the option to quit is what allows you to react to the new stuff that you learn. And
Hmm.
frankly, it's what allows you to make decisions when you're so uncertain in the first place, because you can change course when you find out new things. So I just had a page about that. Like it was nothing in my previous book. Like, hey, the option to quit is super valuable. You should understand that that allows us to decide faster when we're deciding under uncertainty. That's kind of all I said about it. So I'm doing podcasts in 2020, in October of 2020. And it's a very long book. And here's this one page. And every podcast I'm directing to the one page. It's the thing that I really wanted to talk about. And as I kept getting that signal, I was like, I don't know, this is really bugging me. Um, and I just started saying like grit isn't always good. Like look, Angela Duckworth's work is amazing and people should go buy the book Grit. I think it's incredible, but we need to understand that it's not good, period. Like you have to think about the context. And after sort of at the end of October, I called my agent up and I said, I think I want to write a book called Quit. And that was that, and it was just because I couldn't stop thinking about it.
That's the best. Like I truly believe in the ideas that insist upon themselves, because you come up with 1,000 billion ideas. Hopefully, if you have a big garbage fountain of ideas
Yeah, that's
just
it. You have to
installed
quit a lot of them.
in your office, and you're thinking about, oh, this could be a blog post, this could be a podcast, this could be a book. But there's some things that a lot of them just fade into memory, and you see other people doing things maybe, and you're like, well, they did that better than me. But every once in a
Yeah.
while, one will just stick around, and it's thematic too. You talk about that very thing in the book, which is pretty fantastic. And we'll get to grit in a second, because I want to make sure that people who are listening understand that you aren't starting beef with Angela Duckworth with this.
I don't
This
think
book.
Angela, if someone said, oh, you need to have like a discussion with Angela Duckworth, that would be like fireworks. And I was like, no, we'd agree.
Yeah, because you're saying that grit and quit are the two parts of this. There are two sides of the same coin.
Right.
The decision to do one is in a weird way the decision to do the other inverted. Let's just go there before I feel like we naturally can segue to it. What what is the sort of nuanced thread the needle part of grit versus quit for you?
So, I, so my favorite topic here. So
Okay, go.
here's the
Yeah,
great thing about grit is that it gets you to stick to hard things that are worthwhile.
yeah.
Right. So most things that are really worthwhile, that are going to be very fulfilling, you're going to have rough patches. There's going to be hard stuff that's involved. You're going to have to persevere through that in order to, get to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So that's what grit is amazing for. It gets you to stick to hard things that are worthwhile. The problem with grit is that it also gets you to stick to hard things that aren't worthwhile. So here's the thing about Angela Duckworth is she's saying grit, the ability to be able to power through hard things, is really, really important, because otherwise you'll give up on worthwhile stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
But she would never, ever say, which I think is how people misread her work.
Hmm.
She would never, ever say, just stick to stuff. She's saying, like, go find, this is the, so her book is Grit, the Power of Passion and Perseverance, right?
Hmm.
It's, you have to find the thing you're passionate about that's really worthwhile, that's like lighting you up, and you have to quit all the rest of the stuff. And the issue that we have is, and it's a lot of it is because we're sort of rationalizing, we're sort of fitting the world to this bias against stopping,
Hmm.
that we have, is that grit is a virtue and quit is a vice. We think about them as opposing forces, where one is good as one is bad. And grit is the hero of the story. This is how you build character, right? So it's actually, like, in a lot of ways, synonymous with character. So, I mean, David, I can just ask you that, if I call you a quitter, do you think I'm complimenting you?
It would make me feel very bad. Please don't call me a quitter.
Right, because that means you're a loser or
Right.
failure or coward, which is in fact one of the synonyms for the word quitter.
Hmm.
So this now sets up this really bad thing where it becomes grit for grit's sake, because we think that it builds character. And that is the thing that I was trying to do with quit, is say there needs to be a conversation. Oh, and by the way, you misinterpret Angela Duckworth's amazing work anyway,
Hmm.
right? Because the key is not so much stick to things because they're hard, which is how people think about grit, right? Stick to things because they're hard, because that will build character. It will show that I have what it takes. It's stick to things that are worthwhile.
Hmm.
And that's what people don't understand. And the key is, and this is why we have to really skill up on quitting, is we have to be able to tell the difference. We have to know what's worthwhile and what's not. And that's what's really hard, because we're on, that's uncertainty, right? Like,
Hmm.
that's just how it is for us.
Yeah, I love that all this is about uncertainty and ambiguity, and like what we start doing to the weird psychological phenomenon that will bubble up in that you talk all about this in the book, from the endowment effect to all sorts of things. Um, but I also love that you just come out of the gate saying, hey, that whole thing, quitters never win. I played professional poker many years. Quitting is a skill set, and the people who are better at quitting in poker are the ones who beat the people who are not as good at quitting. And you don't want to play every hand to the end. Otherwise, why would we even give you the option to fold? That would be
That's
ridiculous.
exactly right.
And Kenny
And we
Rogers
we
would
give
be
up this
not
thing.
part of would not be part of the cultural zeitgeist if we removed this very important thing. It seems odd that we as a culture we stuck to it. Yeah, continue, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just agreeing with you. We have this incredibly valuable option, right? So we, as humans, we are in the very difficult position of having to decide to start things when we know very little. So you can think about, like, if you hire someone, what do you really know about somebody that you hire? You have their CV and like 2 recommendations and a few interviews. You hardly know anything about them. And that's true of almost everything that we start, whether it's a project or a product that we're launching or a relationship. When you go on a date with somebody, you don't know very much about them. So you're going to discover a whole bunch of information afterwards. And it's incredibly, think about how hard that is, right? That puts us in a very difficult position because we're having to make these educated guesses, these forecasts, given the very limited information we have about how the path that we're choosing, what we're starting is going to turn out. Lucky for us, we have the option to quit. So when we get that news that the path we're on isn't a great path to be on, we have the option to switch to something that is more worthwhile. It's very lucky, super valuable option, and we don't use it. We don't like it. We think if we quit before we know for certain that there's no other choice, that somehow we're a failure. And the thing is, when you talk about like this idea that being a good quitter is what creates success, this is why. Because if you quit well, it will get you to where you want to go faster. It will allow you to achieve your goals more, contrary to the idea that if we quit, it will stop our progress, which I think is part of what we think. Because if I'm on a path that isn't worth pursuing, that isn't actually helping me to achieve happiness or health or fulfillment or whatever it is that I'm trying to achieve in my life, and I've discovered that and I have the signals there that this is not the path that I should be on, every extra minute that I spend on that path is slowing down my progress. Not only is it slowing down my progress, but it's slowing down my progress and compared to another path that I could get on that would allow me to go faster. It's like as simple as this. You take a route to work, and then you find out that a tractor trailer turned over on the road. If you stay on the road, you're slowing your progress toward your destination. Get off at the nearest exit and go find a faster way to get there. And just as when traffic turns bad on you, you really want to exit the road. This is true of pretty much anything that we start. And if we don't get good at that, we are wasting time. And that is a tragedy because our lives are short.
And you detail all sorts of stories in the book of this, people who should have turned around when they were going up a mountain. And because of that, well, they're still on that mountain and you can pass by them if you try to go up that mountain. You talk about all sorts of business decisions that were strange and unusual because people got bit by the sunk cost fallacy and couldn't get out of it. Also, by the way, this quit thing that's in our culture, it used to be a nice, dirty word that we've lost. Poltroon, you talk about this in the book, poltroon. Could you briefly say what happened when somebody was called a poltroon and it got back to them because of that used to be a really terrible thing you would call somebody.
Yeah, so poltroon basically means quitter. And if you called somebody a poltroon, it was grounds for a duel. And so my understanding is, I think it was Alexander Hamilton that he called a poltroon.
And Jackson.
No, sorry, Andrew Jackson. Excuse me, not Alexander Hamilton. Andrew Jackson got called a poltroon, challenged someone to a duel, killed them, and then got elected president.
That's right.
Because everybody was like, "Well, yeah, of course." Like he called you a poltroon, like you had every right to shoot the guy.
Yeah, don't call me a quitter. Like, come on.
Like
I'll show you.
It was literally grounds for like, I'm now going to shoot you, and then everybody agrees with me. So there you go.
Yeah, and I think about the other dude in the duel. He could have backed out, but he didn't want to be seen as a quitter either. And the whole thing spiraled out. There's something that I saw a lot in the book. This, I'm a huge fan of survivorship bias, or just a nerd about it. And it's that thing where you feel like, well, the people I respect in whatever world that you're in, that you aspire to, they're the ones who never quit. They never quit in the face. They stuck with it. They stuck in the face of adversity. But am I wrong in assuming like you just don't see all the things they quit at, and that they use the techniques you're talking about in the book to find the path to the thing that was the better option? It's just that part of the story, because we have such this weirdness about the idea of failure and quitting, we just redact that from the story and we only tell you about that one thing that worked out for them. Am I sort of in the right space there?
Yeah, so there's two issues with those stories. The first is just straight up survivorship bias, right? Which you're referring to, which is we only hear about the people who stuck to it. We don't hear about the people who stuck to it and didn't get anywhere, which is most of them. So, and then what happens is that we think that what works in retrospect will always also work prospectively. So the fact is that in order to have succeeded at something, you will have had to stick to it. That's
Hmm.
Angela Duckworth's point, which is a completely true and valid point. The problem is that that doesn't mean that if you stick to things, you'll succeed, despite whatever aphorisms we have that say that that's true. Um, and so that's part of the problem right there. But then the other issue is what you said, is that we have some sort of idea that these people just stuck with their first idea and like everybody told them no, and they just kept going. And then all of a
Hmm.
sudden they were successful. But just so people know, like, for example, we think about startup founders is, the Mark Zuckerbergs, like founding something at the age of 19 and quitting school and kind of sticking with that forever. But the average age of a successful founder, what on the day at the age when they found the company, is actually in their 40s, because these people have failed a lot. They've done a whole bunch of stuff. They've tried stuff. It hasn't worked. They haven't achieved product market fit, can't
Hmm.
acquire customers, whatever, and they quit it. And so it's the serial entrepreneurs that end up being really successful because they tried a bunch of stuff and then they found the thing that was worth sticking to be able to see, where they saw what other people didn't see. And I think that this is something that's incredibly important to understand, is that it's not so much that we need to get good at quitting because it doesn't make sense that if you just stick to things, you'll succeed. It's that it's a prerequisite, because in order to find the thing that's worth sticking to, you have to do a lot of exploration, which means you're going to explore a whole bunch of stuff that, ends up in the trash pile of ideas. And those are all things that you've quit. So, I just don't think that we appreciate like how important this option is to us and why we need to really skill up on it.
I I love all of this so much, and you have these a lot of advice, especially about halfway in. You start giving all these bullet points about here are things you can do. What I liked about this, what I like about all of this book is that you could focus on poker, you could focus on mountain climbing, whatever. But the idea is that these are psychological phenomena that emerge from any human brain because this is how cognition works. And that's why the Kahneman Tversky stuff is so great, is that once you're in it, you use that phrase a couple times, it's really hard to make the good decision. And some of the advice you give is about things you can do before you're in it to create sort of measures of when you ought to be quitting. And I won't give that away. Buy the book, people. Those are the bullet points you need to get to. I want to talk about some of the things that happen when you are in it that you're talking about dealing with. We don't have a whole lot of a time for that, but I want to try to get to in.
Okay.
Uh, One is just the fact that you use Katamari Damacy as as a metaphor thrilled me to no end. What did you
Oh my
use?
gosh, I
I'm not
love
going to give
that.
it away. How and why did you use that? And if you could tell people what that even is,
Okay,
I
so
loved it.
this is a game that my daughter was obsessed with. I used to watch her play this game, and it never occurred to me at the time when like she was obsessed with this game that I would then be able to use it for something. So Katamari is a game where the premise is that a king got drunk um,
Yeah.
and destroyed a whole bunch of stars and planets. So we kind of wiped those out. And his son, the prince, now needs to create new stars and planets. And he gives him a katamari, which is Japanese for clump, a little tiny clump that he's now going to roll around stuff. And if the clump runs into something that's bigger than it sort of falls apart and becomes small again. But if it goes over something that's smaller than it, it grows. Okay, so in the beginning, you can only pick up like a thumbtack. But if you do this well, you're then picking up cats and cows and houses and trees. And as one critic put it, then you're ripping bloody rainbows out of the ground, right? As you grow, and then once it gets big enough, it replaces a star. So the thing that the reason why I talked about that, I mean, it's separate and apart from it thrilled me that I was like, oh,
Good work. I loved it.
my daughter's obsession, I can actually use this, is that a lot of the problems that we have with quitting are things that build on themselves. So they grow like the Katamari. They start off as just a little bit of friction against quitting. And then as we don't quit, because of that little bit of friction, there becomes more friction and more friction and more friction and more friction that keeps stopping us from quitting. So let's take something like the sunk cost fallacy. And I think that we can get to it here. So the sunk cost fallacy is very simply that we make the error of taking into account what we've already spent and deciding whether to continue and spend more. So in the simplest sense, you buy a stock at 50, it's now trading at 40, you're $10 down. Do you now continue to hold it, which is the same as buying? So if you continue to hold it, that's saying that if I were to approach this as a fresh decision today, I would be willing to buy this stock.
Hmm.
And what the sunk cost fallacy shows is that in situations where you would not buy that stock today, you will continue to hold it because you are down $10. Now,
Hmm.
that's a really huge mistake. And part of it is that we think about waste as a backward looking problem, but I don't want to waste that time. Or
Hmm.
like with a job, I don't want to waste the time and effort and all the training that I put into this thing. If I quit, I'll have wasted that. But the issue is that waste is really a forward looking problem.
Hmm.
Should I put the next dollar, the next bit of time, or the next bit of effort into something? And that's really the question. And we shouldn't waste more going forward because we're worried about losing what's already lost.
Hmm.
So that's the sunk cost effect. So now let's think about the Katamari problem here, which is, let's say that I've accumulated some losses, right? So I've put some time into a job, or I've made an investment that's kind of on the way down, or I've already started down a project, or I'm developing a product, or whatever it might be. I'm starting to accrue sunk costs. So now I come to some decision about whether I want to quit. I take those sunk costs into account. I now don't quit and I continue. And what does that make me do? It makes me put more time, more effort, more money into what I'm doing. So now I'm accruing even more sunk costs, which then when I now come to the next quitting decision are going to make it even harder to quit because now what my Katamari has grown. Right. And this just keeps going on over and over and over again, creating this huge bias against quitting.
Hmm.
So thank you, Maud, my oldest daughter, for obsessively playing that game so much, where I just said, what is this game? I don't understand why she's so obsessed with it, but it ended up being used to good purpose.
I love it. And for everyone listening, that Richard Thaler, who is the person who gave us this wonderful thing and did a lot of the landmark work that produced this word, this phrase, the sunk cost fallacy, and helped create the research that has lasted to this day, helped you with the material. Like it's you got it firsthand. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So one of the things that he talks about that I think he really pushed me on to get into the book was, so obviously, like I'm familiar with this paper in 1980 that is so seminal, where he identifies the sunk cost fallacy for the first time as a general phenomenon. As he puts it, economists used to use it as a dismiss, right? So economists used to try to say that everybody's rational, and then someone would bring up a question of like, well, this person doesn't seem to be rational. And they'd say, oh, that's just sunk cost, as if it was nothing. And he was the first person who said, this isn't just nothing. It's not an exception. This is really a rule of human behavior. He also identifies the endowment effect in that paper. I mean, so these things, I talked to him about, but I well-researched already knew. The thing that he really pushed me on was to sort of bring these things together into this umbrella concept that has to do with mental accounting.
Hmm.
So you can think about, we have ledger sheets, right? Like you buy a bunch of stocks and you have some P&L that's associated with each of those stocks. Well, what he talks about is that when we start something, we open up a mental account for it. So that's true whether we buy a stock or we start a job or we start a relationship or we start a project, whatever it might be, we now have a mental account open for that. And as we sort of move along in that, we can start to accrue losses in that mental account. Right. And to be clear, that could be like we've actually lost, like I bought the stock at 50 and now it's trading at 40. But these losses that we're accruing are a cognitive phenomenon. So what that means is, like, if I buy a stock at 50 and it goes to 75 and goes back down to 60, in my mental account, I'm in the losses, even though like on my ledger, I made $10. That's not the way I experience it because I was at 75. If I
Hmm.
run 13 miles of a marathon, like objectively, I'm 13 miles richer than I used to be, but cognitively, I'm 13.2 miles in the losses compared to that ultimate goal. So he talks about this phenomenon of these mental accounts being in the losses. And he just makes the point, and this relates obviously to sunk costs, that we don't like to close mental accounts in the
Hmm.
losses. It's just as simple as that. Because, and this goes back to work that Kahneman and Tversky did, as long as you keep the gamble on, in other words, as long as the account is still open, maybe things will go your way and you can wipe those losses off the books,
Hmm.
right? Maybe it can all be worth your time. And so we want to keep the account open so that we don't have to take those losses. And this becomes like thematically a really huge issue in our bias against quitting, particularly because again, it's a cognitive phenomenon. It's the way that we're processing the world that determines whether we think we're in the losses or not,
Mhm.
and whether we're going to have to take that and sort of take that from like a loss on the books into a realized loss.
And we're gonna go do the Q&A in a second, but I want people to know what we're talking about right here. Like, it's not just some of these books can be just descriptions of things that you should know about. Uh, your book has things you should do to avoid the bad outcomes that come from all of these biases and weird cognitive effects
That are
uh,
science backed. I
that are
didn't make
science
them up.
backed. They're not just things you wrote on a notepad and said that'd be fun to put in the book. And weird things like quit coaches and things like that, but also very practical things that I found like I was like, oh, this is fun to read, and I can't get wait to talk to Annie about this. But then I was like, oh wait, no, I got life advice from this that I'm going to use for forever. So thank you.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
it's really good. It's a fantastic book. I hope everyone gets it. If you do get it, tell everybody else to get it. For the sake of time, clearly I could nerd out with you on this for another 90 minutes and
Oh, I
just
have like 5 hours in me, but
uh, for the sake of people are here because they want to ask questions and get a chance to hang out with you. I have been directed to click on these buttons here. One of them is Q&A. If you want to look at it with me, we can answer some of these.
okay.
Does one of these stick out to you, or we can just do them in order? Um, we can start with I'm going to start with number one, just because number one, you got it in there first. Anonymous attendee. Uh, what decisions do you not make as well as you should, given your research? This is just directed
Okay,
right
yeah,
at
that's
you.
an easy one to answer all of them. And I'm not being facetious. So here's the thing about human decision making is there's all sorts of errors that we make. I mean, if you read anything like Thinking Fast and Slow, for example, David's books, we're just riddled with error. And the question is like, are we doing better than we otherwise would have? So just as an example of like one of the things that I recommend is if we're really bad at the decision when we're facing it down, like it's hard to eat healthy when there's an open box of chocolates in front of you. Think in advance about how you can avoid those chocolates or like have better behavior toward those chocolates. One of the things that we did in poker was we would have loss limits. And these loss limits would try to improve our decision making when we were in the losses in a game. So in other words, if I bought into a game and I was like, I would say, all right, if I'm losing $2,000, then I have to get up and quit. And the reason for that was that I just kind of recognized in advance that I wasn't going to be very good at the decision about whether to quit when I was actually in the losses like that, like when I had lost $2,000.
Mhm.
And it was that moment where I was going to have to decide to get up from the table and actually write that in a notebook was going to feel really bad to me. And if I knew that I was going to be a bad decision maker at that moment, then I was going to decide in advance. And so I would set this loss limit. So here's the thing that made me better, but that didn't mean that I always got up when I hit my loss limit, but I was just more likely to do it. And in the long run, as you sort of get a little bit better at these things because you're putting in these strategies, it really pays off in the long run. So the answer is I don't think I make any decisions as well as I should, given what my research is, because I'm not objective and none of us are.
Mhm.
We're all
That's
living in our
great.
own perspective, just trying to get better at this stuff. Now,
Sure.
as far as Molly's game, I played in it one time, but she wasn't actually the one who ran it. It was before her time. I played in it one time. I actually like purposely lost my money, so I was hoping to get invited back. This was, I didn't know all the shenanigans those shenanigans occurred later. This was when it was just like some actors and businessmen like in LA before it ever moved. So I actually purposely lost money, and then they didn't invite me back because they said that they didn't want
That's
someone who was
good.
good at poker in the game. So
That's great.
but as having watched the movie, I'm quite grateful that I didn't get invited back, I guess, because I
Mhm.
think I would have been cheated. So that would have been bad.
Nice. And if anyone who's still here, like, which is looks like everybody, you click on your button down there for Q&A, and we will try to get some of your questions in when we have time. I'm gonna go to the bottom of the list because those people almost never get their things answered. Aaron Pengilnian, I pronounced your name incorrectly, and that's because I'm a fool. You have an interesting thing here. We're trying to start beef, apparently, Annie, with lots of people. This time it's Gary V. Uh, the What do you think about Gary Vee saying it's smart to quit in under 3 months at a job and knowing it's not a good when you know it's not a good fit, whereas prior thinking said you should be there a year and so you can put it on your resume. What do you think about this?
I'm not an expert in what your resume is supposed to look like. So let me just say that. Um, Generally, these are all have to do with cost benefit analysis. So if you determine that the benefits of not looking like you bounce from job to job outweigh the costs of being miserable in your work, that is a value decision for you. So this is one of the things that I want to say is that I give lots of advice about how to get better at quitting, but I'm not prescriptive and telling you what you should or shouldn't quit, because that's not up to me. These have to do with your own values. So when we decide if a path is worthwhile for us, what we're weighing is the benefits. What are we getting out of it, right? Versus the costs. And those facts on the ground can change as we go along. So as an example, if I'm deciding that I want to climb Everest, it's costing me time with my family. It's costing me a lot of money. It's costing me my own comfort. And so I am purposely like deprivileging those things that I value for doing something that no human being has, or very few human beings actually manage to achieve. So, really feeling like that's going to give me fulfillment. Now, there's lots of people who don't think that the benefits of making it to the summit are worth those costs, but then there are people who do, and that's totally fine, as long as you include in that. But if the conditions change, then I will react to it. So yes, I'm going to continue up the mountain unless, right, like a snowstorm comes in, and then I really ought to walk away from this. And I would say it's true with any job. So you're going to come in with some idea, right, which is, I'm hoping the job is going to work out this particular way. Here are the signs that it's working out well. Here will be the signs that it's working out poorly. And I have this goal, which may be, I want a year on my resume because that's going to give me future benefits. Maybe it's not. And then that's how you're sort of figuring this stuff out, is what are your values? What are the things you're willing to give up in order to get the things that you want? So, I just think that any rules about these things, hopefully we can avoid those, right? And say, for now, this is what I believe to be true, but the facts on the ground may change. And I'm going to think in advance about how I might react to those things.
That's great. Frederick Banson asks, in the quit versus grit dilemma, what do you think of the idea of using a hierarchy of goals to help with quitting decisions? And I like that this question, because you've got a whole chapter about goals. And you talk about goals a whole lot, and you poo-poo on goals a little bit in a very particular scientific way.
I poo-poo on them a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I open the floor to talking about goals, and what do you think about creating a hierarchy of goals?
Okay, so first of all, I'm a big fan of a hierarchy of goals, because basically what a hierarchy of goals does is get you from short-term to long-term. And really what we should be doing is, one of the things I say is, like, poker is one long game. Well, so is life. So the longer the time horizon on your goals, the better off you're going to be in terms of really achieving those things. Because when we think about whether something is worthwhile continuing, it should be in the context of what your long-term goals are, not your short-term ones. So fan of that. That being said, there's a downside to goals. So very clear goals that tell somebody, this is what you're trying to accomplish, and here's what you're reaching for, we know are very good motivators, right? So I'm not saying you shouldn't have goals. Obviously you should. It gives you a direction, and it will generally help you to achieve those things with a higher probability. That being said, what you want to watch out for is the goal becoming the object. So remember, goal is a proxy for a cost benefit analysis, right? I'm going to do this thing, but that's going to cost me the ability to do other things. Okay, so that's what a goal basically is, because all the time that I'm spending on this project is time I couldn't be spending on another project. If I'm pursuing a sales lead, it's time I can't spend on another sales lead. If I go on this date, it's time I can't go out on a date with somebody else. If I'm in this job, it's time I can't be doing another job at the exact same time. So we have to remember that when you decide to pursue something, that you're deciding it's worthwhile in comparison to the other things that you might pursue. But then what happens is the goal becomes an object. It becomes the object of your desire, right? And we lose sight of the fact that it's the proxy for a cost benefit analysis. And what that means is we'll run headlong toward the goal no matter what, because goals are pass fail in nature. What do I mean by that? Well, I think it's best sort of exemplified by this woman, Siobhan O'Keefe. In 2019, she's running the London Marathon. On mile 4, her leg really starts to hurt. On mile 8, she snaps her fibula bone. She literally broke her leg.
Mm.
Now, I assume we all share the intuition. Well, if I were running a marathon and I broke my leg on mile 8, I would stop.
Mhm.
And why would you stop? Because you're costing yourself the ability to run in the future.
Mhm.
Like it could turn into a compound fracture. You're certainly extending your time. And again, in that hierarchy of goals, if what we're thinking is, I want to do these really cool things that most people don't do to be healthier and more fulfilled over time, then stacking the finish line of that marathon in between that and that being the object is going to be a bad thing, because it will likely make you want to continue, which is exactly what happened to her. She kept going toward the finish line and in fact finished the race. Unless you think that she's unusual, 3 other people in the same race did the same thing. And if you just Google like people finishing with broken bones and marathons, you're going to see like tons and tons and tons of Google hits come up. Why? Because there's a finish line that's a fixed object,
Mhm.
and we grade goals as pass fail. If I run 20 miles of a marathon, I have failed. I didn't succeed in running 20 miles. I failed in reaching 26. If I get to 300 feet from the summit of Everest, I failed.
Mhm.
So this is the problem with goals, is that they are fixed, they become a proxy, and then we grade them pass fail. And then what that means is that once we're concentrated, like at all costs on getting to that goal, we lose sight of all the other things we could do with that time, which is clearly what happened to Siobhan O'Keefe, right? Like
Mhm.
she lost sight of all the races she wasn't going to be able to run because of what had happened to her leg. So my whole thing is, first of all, make sure your goals are long term, which has to do with goal stacking, right? Like how are we thinking about a hierarchy of goals? Make sure you're concentrating on the long thing, but also make sure that you have unlesses attached to your goal. I'm going to run the race unless I break my leg. I'm going to play in this poker game unless I'm losing $2,000. I'm going to stay in this job unless leadership turns out to be toxic.
Mhm.
And I find myself taking sick days because I don't want to go to work. Right. I mean, that's the thing that we need to stop, is the goal itself from becoming the object of our desire.
I love it. It's such an opportunity to put your values at play ahead of time before you're in the middle of something and you're doing silly algorithmic
Yeah.
stuff that
Yeah.
brains do. That's fantastic. Also, anyone who's asking questions in the chat, ask them over in the Q&A, doodad. I know it's kind of weird, but we're doing it just in the Q&A. That helps keep it all in one place for me. The goal question, I like how that like intuited something that you already addressed in the book. This one does something as well that intuits something that's in the book. My favorite part of the book, actually. How do you separate your identity? This is from Vanessa Payant. How do you separate your identity from whatever you are quitting if you invested a big portion of your life on that identity? This is a great
Yeah.
question. I love this.
Oh gosh. So yeah, there's a chapter called Identity and Other Impediments.
Mhm.
Uh, and it really has to do with this issue, which is, or actually it's a section that's called that, with a chapter said, which is the hardest thing to quit is who you are.
Mhm.
So this is a really big problem that we have, is that the things we do and the things we believe become part of our identity. And particularly when that's the case, it becomes very, very hard for us to walk away from things. And, I think that we all share the intuition that when the world tells us something that we believe isn't true, it tells us that the path we're on is not one we should be following, that we will obviously pay attention to the world. If we're running a marathon and we break our leg, we're not going to keep going. If we're climbing Everest and a snowstorm rolls in, we'll stop. And decades and decades of research shows us that we do not do that. And we particularly don't do that when it's a question of identity. So just a quick story about this so
Mhm.
that we can see like really what the cost to us of this is. So most people are familiar with Sears, which is a retail company that had stores where you would go buy things. I think most people also know it went bankrupt. So in the late 1800s, it was founded as a catalog company, the Book of Bargains, 512 pages. Around the 1930s, when people started driving cars, they started figuring out that the catalogs weren't quite as valuable because people were more mobile. And so they started opening up retail locations, which is the way that I remember Sears. By the 1950s, Sears represented 1% of the US gross national product. I mean, it was a behemoth, like
Mm.
crazy store.
Mhm.
Now, what happens is that sort of 60s and 70s, the Walmarts and the Kmarts come along and they start squeezing Sears from the bottom. And then also like Nordstrom's and some higher end stores start squeezing them from the top. And they just find their place in the retail space to be narrower and narrower. By the 90s, they're no longer the number one retailer. And then they go bankrupt. And so everybody remembers that story about Sears. What people probably don't know, though, is that Sears was also a financial services company. Really, mainly, they had credit that they gave to their customers, but the main start of this journey is that when they opened those retail stores to accommodate cars, that someone had a very good idea, which is, well, people need insurance for those cars. So why don't we start to offer insurance in our stores to them? And they founded a company called Allstate Insurance. Right? Like, okay.
Yeah.
So Allstate comes to be the largest insurer of personal liability in the US. In the 70s, they acquire a company called Dean Witter, which is a very big stock brokerage. They also create something called the Discover card. Maybe you've heard of it.
Mhm.
And they acquire a company called Coldwell Banker. So the combined assets of those, it's hard to say because Dean Witter doesn't exist anymore, but Morgan Stanley eventually acquired it, and it represented 40% of Morgan Stanley's worth at the time. So let's just call that lots of money.
Mhm.
But at the time that I was writing the book, Allstate's market cap was $40 billion alone. Okay, so we're talking about billions and billions of dollars worth of net worth. So now the question is, why are they broke? I mean, I assume that's the question, right, David? Like, hold on a second. They owned Allstate Insurance.
Mhm.
That's weird. Why are they broke? They had Discover card. Why are they broke?
Mhm.
And the answer is that as they started to get pushed out, and it gets to be the 90s where they're no longer the number one retailer, the shareholders are demanding action. They've got these assets, the retail business, that are failing. They've got these other assets, the financial services businesses, that are just absolutely booming. And it goes to the board. What are we going to do about this company and these retail locations? And they say, we're going to get back to our retailing roots. So they sell off all the financial services assets in order to save the retail business. Why? Because they were a retailer.
Mhm. We're Sears.
We're
Every mall.
Sears.
It's in every mall.
Yeah.
People know
Nobody
us.
even knows. Nobody knows that they had Allstate. So they sell off all that stuff and go broke. Now, this is what you're doing every single day of your life. When you have beliefs that are part of your identity, you're selling all your stuff off that's good, particularly when facts start to come in conflict with that identity that you're holding. And in particular, we have to be really careful when that identity is staking out ground that is non-consensus.
Mhm.
So you can kind of think about it this way. So, David, I assume at one point in your life, you believed that Pluto was a planet,
I did.
but so did everybody else. So there's nothing there, you're not staking your identity on your beliefs around Pluto because it's something
No.
that everybody believes, right? So when you now find out, when some scientist comes along and says, oh, by the way, Pluto's not a planet anymore, you're not saying, no, I reject you. It is a planet. I'm going to hold on to the belief. No, you just let it go.
Mhm.
But it's not true if you believe the Earth is flat.
Mhm. I can tell you
Because
that. I can tell you I'm intimately familiar with the flat Earth community from my
right,
previous work. Yeah, please.
because they believe something that is naturally part of their identity because they're
Mhm.
staking out very extreme ground, right?
Mhm.
This is very non-consensus. So when the facts come into conflict with that, they reject it. They
Mhm.
reject the facts and they cling to their beliefs. And this is true also for people who are like really financially motivated not to do this. So they had Katie Milkman and John Brashears did a study on stock analysts and who were just making earnings projections for companies. And when they made projections that were consensus projections and the earnings came in and conflicted with their forecast, rather, they updated their forecast. But when they made an earnings estimate that was way out of consensus, and then the earnings estimate came in and it didn't agree with them, they doubled down.
Mhm.
They escalated their commitment to those forecasts. So these become really, really difficult problems. And the only way to deal with this kind of stuff is to do two things: is not try to do it now because you're going to be protecting your identity, but say, what could I see in the future that would cause me to change my mind? And then, as you said, quitting coaches, go find someone to declare that to help you with the decision.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's going to be impossible. We just want to be viewed as consistent.
Yeah,
We want our identities to be
trustworthy members
consistent.
of of the groups to which we owe allegiance. We want to be
That is
considered
exactly right.
trustworthy and consistent, and those factors are way more motivating than whatever math you've worked out on your ledger. That's
Yeah.
social primate stuff. It's strong.
That's exactly right. So don't try to do it today. You have to look into the future and say, what could I see in the future that would tell me that this belief that I hold is not true? And, and this is true. Like, I mean, we can see this for political beliefs. It's like people will support candidates where, had you asked them before they actually started their support and said, if you knew this set of facts, would you support them? They would say, absolutely not. But the minute that bumper sticker goes on the car,
Yep.
the minute the sign is in their front yard, or
Mm-hmm.
they cast a vote,
Mm-hmm.
because that vote also informs who their identity is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when those new facts come in, what do? They rationalize them away. They say, oh no, but the other stuff they do is great, or the other guy is worse, or, all of these ways that we can reject the facts. And so you have to be really conscious of that for yourself and start setting out, like, what could I see in the future that would make me drop my support, as an example.
That's beautiful. That's I want to talk to you about that for 45 minutes and ignore what's going on here. But we have to move to this next thing.
Yeah.
Before they cut us off, there's one last great question in this Q&A, which is from Lisa Mage, who asks, do you know which page of this book is going to be the topic of your next book?
Oh, so first of all, like I have very different reactions to every book that I write.
Yeah.
So the first book that I wrote, I kind of knew I was going to, the first general audience book, Thinking in Bets, I kind of knew I was going to write another book. Then I wrote How to Decide, literally swore up and down I was never going to write another book again. And ended up overlapping quit with that book. This book, I'm not sure, is where I am. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I
Are you
have a
going to
couple
quit?
ideas.
Are you going to quit? I
I
guess that's
don't
the big
know.
question.
Like, I'm giving it some time because I
Mm-hmm.
wrote 3 books in the space of 4 years.
Hmm.
And I just honestly feel like I need a break. Separate and apart from that, I'm writing a dissertation right now. So like I just have to do that. Like I have to finish that first and defend it in the winter. So let me get that. I'm sort of in the let me get that out of the way thing. But the work that I did for my dissertation actually has me super peaked on a particular topic that has to do with kind of crux issues. In the nerdiest way, mostly we should assume regression to the mean, but sometimes we shouldn't. And it's when there are paradigm shifts. And I think it's like a super
Oh.
interesting topic. It's what my dissertation is about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sort of I'm finished. I'm going to write the dissertation. What I suspect is the next book is going to come from that. That's what I
That's
think.
great.
But,
So
I don't know,
there's a
like it's a
page in the
forecast. We'll
dissertation that's
see.
going to be in the next book.
I think it will be a page in my dissertation
That's
that's going
great.
to be the next book.
Love it. Oh my God. Our handlers, jump in now or we'll never stop talking because as soon as you said paradigm shift, I was like, okay, that's something I want to jam out on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like crux issues, like
Mm-hmm.
where nature cleaves at its joints. Like I find that very interesting.
We're gonna wrap this up in 3 minutes. So I don't know what to say except for who do you, this is a fun go-to question I do on the podcast, which is
Okay.
who is the like who do you hope is the person who picks this book up and what do you hope they get out of it? Like who is the audience that you hope this goes to? Like some people write books and they think, this is a business book, or some people think this is a book for people in tech world. And there's a lot of there were some NFT questions in the chat about people who are like, I didn't know when to quit or when not to quit. What do you think?
I got some things to say about NFTs and
Well, let's just
Bitcoin.
jump
Actually,
there.
I've been talking about it, but
Okay.
I talked
This
to
person,
Jason Weig about it today. It
yeah.
may appear in the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday. You may see what I say about it. Yeah, so here's the thing, like all of my books obviously are sort of generally more a little bit business books.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you with this book, when I was writing it, I did do a couple of just a handful, like maybe 2 or 3 podcasts where I was sort of road testing,
Mhm.
which I'm sure you do as well, David.
A little bit.
Where you're kind of trying out some of the ideas. And I was on Maya Shankar's podcast, A Slight
Oh,
Change of
love
Plans,
Maya.
which is
Love Maya.
wonderful. Everybody
Mhm.
should be a subscriber of that podcast.
Mhm.
And I was talking about this, and someone wrote into me and said, you know, I just always thought, like, in order to have character and you have to be gritty, that this is a really important quality for you to develop in yourself. And I heard your podcast, and I just want to thank you because I was in a job that was a really toxic situation. and I felt like I couldn't quit because it would have been a failure of my character, and I quit today. And I'm
Wow.
so thankful and I'm really happy. And that's who the book is for. I mean, to be quite honest, like I'm sort of tearing up. Like the thought that something that I wrote allowed someone to see that you don't just have to stick to things,
Mhm.
that that's not what it's about. Like that in itself is not good. That sticking to things that are worthwhile is good. But if it's not, like your life is too short, like free yourself up from these situations that you're in and see that it doesn't mean that you're a failure. It means that you're a success.
Mhm.
I mean, like really, like I'm just sort of,
It means you're a human being. Yeah.
yeah, and that she wrote that to me. Like it was so amazing to get that note. And it's like, that's who I wrote the book for.
That's
That's it.
beautiful. Loved it. Annie, thank you so much for this. This has been an absolute pleasure. I feel like I got something out of this. I'm walking away from this a better person. Thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everyone else who came here. And I look forward to this going out in the world on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank
Thank
you for
you.
everyone for pre-ordering. I'm so grateful to everybody for supporting my work, reading my work. We authors, we send stuff out in the world and cross our fingers that people will want to read what we've written. And none of this happens without all of you. So I just want to shout out some like incredible gratitude to everybody who came to listen to me and David chat with each other.
Thank you, Annie and David, so much. And I just wanted to call out, in case you missed it in the chat, that we have captured all of the questions in the Q&A. If we didn't get to your question tonight, then keep your eyes on Annie's Twitter feed, because she might be answering them in the days and weeks to come. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we will circulate the YouTube link when it's available. Thanks. Have a great night.